It was the most beautiful thing Sam had ever seen. Lucy sat idling at the crest of Century Hill off Highway 48, clinking and clanking as her engine slowly cooled and Dingbell moved about. Sam sat on her hood and watched the pink sea move beneath him, filling the valley and spilling into the orange and red of the fall plains made all the more beautiful by the reflecting lights. The lights coming from the valley were so intense that they washed out the stars above. Tens, no, hundreds of thousands of spirits formed the storm Sam had heard about on the radio. Sam had seen the faceless spirits coalescing at the vale separating Point Pleasant and the Wilds as recently as a few weeks ago, but they were mere fireflies in comparison to the raging wildfire that now spread before him. And in this moving sea, eddies of various size could be seen swirling around larger and more brilliant focal points of spirit aura. Sam knew that not all spirits were created equal, and those people or other entities that were more powerful in life shined brighter after it. Squinting his eyes and letting them adjust, Sam saw that the largest spirit aura by far looked to be a mad skeleton riding a red camel. Sam pulled out his cryptic cam and took a snapshot of it, hoping it would focus properly in spite of all the eerie lighting. As the cryptic cam spat out the film, Sam twisted the cap off his Sharpie and quickly jotted down Red Ghost, October 15th, 2031, in surprisingly legible handwriting. The red ghost generated a swirling eddy about it so large it might as well have been driving the entire spirit storm. And Sam realized it was. And to what purpose? Just ahead of the spirit storm, an equally bright but infinitely more human caravan of lights fled into the fields. Sam had been watching the scene unfold as both made their slow but steady trek across the valley for the past hour. Beyond this, just past the spirit storm's light and into the darkness of the night that it magnified, Sam felt an unnatural pulsing that made his insides squirm like furry trouts. It seemed like the spirit storm and the caravan sensed it as well, because they both formed a U-shaped path around a blackness that encroached upon the valley. A blackness that seemed entirely untouchable by the lights from either party. That untouchable darkness was Sam's destination. But even the darkest night succumbed to the light eventually, and tonight's darkness was no different. Just as the spiritual vortex was about to overcome the fleeing caravan, the morning sun began to rise in the west, spilling natural light into the valley. As it did, the spirit storm subsided and then eventually disappeared altogether, following whatever strange mechanics that prevented the spirits from existing in daylight. The caravan appeared to have stopped in its tracks as well, and Sam would have noticed this had he not been fixated on something else entirely. Just where the darkness stood moments before, a castle was illuminated in the morning's lights, yellows and oranges. A river curled lazily around it. A river that, for some reason beyond Sam's understanding, had reflected neither the stars nor the ghostly lights of the storm. The Loveland Castle stood like something out of time. A folly to a traditional European castle built in the 1920s that had no place in modern America, but somehow made sense in the Cryptid Nation. And though the morning light made visible its stone facade, Sam had the uneasy feeling that very little light actually touched it. In fact, Sam had the distinct impression that even if he had wanted to, something would have prevented him from entering the archway that led into the castle's courtyard. Magic! This place is soaked in magic, Sam thought to himself, stifling a yawn. And that made sense. After all, this is where the radio had said Mothman had been sighted in the previous evenings. Sam had tried to get here in time to see the place in the dead of night, but perhaps he had been too late. Perhaps the morning light was too close for Mothman's comfort, even an hour ago. So, Sam would have to wait until nightfall and the darkness to return. Rustling in the back of Lucy, Sam pulled out an impromptu picnic basket made out of a recycled Coleman cooler. If he was going to wait, he might as well do it on a full stomach. At the diner, he resupplied as much was reasonable and had enough cold cuts to make a garbage sandwich on a repurposed hamburger bun. Turkey slices, thick slabs of ham, tomatoes, shredded lettuce, pickles, and crushed up Lay's potato chips. But there was one last finishing touch that was needed before it was officially a Sinclair sandwich. Sam's father had shown him a delicious trick when he was 5 years old. Combining ketchup, mustard, pesto, and mayo in just the right combination created what his father called green slime, a tribute to a children's television show his father apparently watched when he was a kid. As Sam tucked into the Sinclair sandwich, he figured he would once again attempt what had become almost a morning ritual, checking to see if M's Crimson Spellbook had decided to reveal its secrets to Sam. Pulling it out of his backpack, not expecting anything to be different this time, Sam was not prepared for what he saw next. The golden M that had decorated the face of the spellbook was now gone. Apparently, having nothing but blank pages wasn't abandonment enough. Now the ancient spellbook appeared almost entirely new and untouched. Sam let out a sigh of frustration and threw the book into the back of Lucy, clipping his bat before turning his attention back to the Loveland Castle. Sam was no longer alone. In only 30 minutes or so, the first group of what Sam suspected to become many appeared half a mile upriver. It didn't surprise Sam. In the past week, Mothman had been all over the news as a phantom that left a path of destruction in its wake. Any sighting was sure to draw news crews, bounty hunters, and those casters looking to subjugate Mothman to their will, or perhaps test their mettle against an entity historically known to be one of the most powerful beasties in existence. This first group was composed entirely of young men and women around Sam's age. College kids, most likely from the local tower, Sam thought to himself as he polished off the last bit of his Sinclair sandwich. And they indeed looked the part. Donned in bright blue robes not unlike what he observed the student casters wearing at Quimbley's, Sam recognized the unique tint of blue as the official color of Tower Aguazul, a tower that specialized in water aura casting based out of Dayton, Ohio. The group rode in on steam-powered motorized bikes, not an uncommon form of transportation in a greener world where the more complicated pieces of machinery in most engines burned out a decade ago. Hammered onto the frame of each bike was a metallic plate with the logo of their tower. A droplet of water inside a silhouette of a unisex human head shined brightly in the morning light. Sam took a moment to appreciate the bravery needed to report on a sighting of the flying catastrophe that was Mothman, before reminding himself that they likely knew considerably more about casting than himself. They busied themselves setting up a sky blue tent that likely housed their reporting equipment. The second group showed up 3 hours later along the river from the opposite direction of the Tower Aguazul students. Speeding in a beat-up van, they stirred up a morning dust storm as they passed over the scars of the ground left by the caravan only a few hours before. As they parked about a quarter-mile upriver of the Tower Aguazul students, Sam was able to make out the Cryptid Busters of Lexington logo painted in a chipped yellow lettering across the side of the van. It varied, but Cryptid Busters were generally quite capable at casting. They had to be, otherwise they wouldn't survive very long on the job. It was likely that the city of Lexington, assuming it wasn't abandoned or a scorched mark on Cassius's map, hired the Cryptid Busters to come here and deal with the threat just north of their border. But, Sam thought to himself, his inner voice troubled, if that's the case, where's the Cryptid Buster crew from Cincinnati? Based on the weathered and pocked metal of the van, Sam guessed that the casters within balanced on the more experienced side. Good, Sam thought. Their talents might be needed. The van doors never opened, so Sam couldn't get a good look at the casters within to verify his suspicions. Roughly 6 hours later, and just 3 hours before sunset, a third group detached itself from the caravan and had already begun to continue its trek up north. Sam couldn't quite make out what they were wearing, but they brought with them some pretty serious filming equipment. The fourth and final party to join the Mothman sighting entourage actually emerged from behind Sam and Lucy at a brisk pace and with so little sound that they were almost upon Sam before he noticed their presence with a start. A carriage pulled by two hugugs, a large, gangly, fearsome critters that reminded Sam of tired camels more than anything else, and jet black against the afternoon sun, blasted past Sam and left him reeling as he jumped out of the way. The carriage and its mysterious occupant settled somewhere between the students and the Cryptid Buster crew. And so the hours drew on. Sam remembered that as a child the passage of time was made easier with various electronic devices. Watching Paw Patrol on his father's iPad, attending 5th grade classes digitally via Zoom during the first year of the COVID-19 pandemic. Sam pondered about how even though the summers of his childhood seemed to last forever, after the veil shattered, time seemed to elongate. Without the constant hum of his computer or phone, he was forced to watch time march on and appreciate every moment of it, whether he liked it or not. And so he waited. And waited. Sam's mind forged beasties from the clouds that passed above him, and he watched as the shadows grew longer. As the shadows grew so long that they began to connect and meld, the troop that had assembled at the base of the Loveland Castle began to rustle. Sam knew there were precious moments before the re-emergence of the spirit storm. He didn't quite understand the magic of it, but every time sunlight blinked a spirit temporarily out of existence, it generally blinked into existence exactly where it had left off the following night. However, it didn't happen immediately. During dusk, the ambient light was still too powerful for spiritual aura, and so the 30-minute bridge between daylight and true nighttime was all the time they had before the spirit storm sprang back into existence, and Loveland Castle would be in the eye of it. The real question was, would Mothman reveal itself during dusk, or wait for the full cover of nighttime as well? Even if it did, would 30 minutes really be enough time to subdue it and then escape with their lives? What exactly was the plan? What were they doing here? The motley crew of teenagers and mysterious men in vans and secret carriages seemed to recognize this all at once, as though they temporarily shared a psychic link. The absurdity of the situation struck the group collectively like chain lightning, but they continued to march on as though they had no choice in the matter. "Stranger things have happened since the veil shattered," Sam concluded with a silent and slightly manic chuckle.